Hello there once again. This is Vin Rogers doing an old magic trick. Isn't it wonderful what you can do electronically? We old folks have to do what we can. That's what's known as the appearing act. It's one I've worked through the years with very little success. Anyway, I'm here today to talk about Vatican and the Vatican Bank. Now, many of you don't even know that there is such a thing as a Vatican Bank. They don't advertise it. They really don't. They just soon you not know about it. But there it is. It didn't always have a bank. They started it in World War II because the situation was so grave in international finance that transactions were difficult to do and so forth. And the Vatican could no longer rely on, say, banks in Germany and so forth. And so they formed their own bank under Pope Pius XII. Almost immediately, the thing became corrupt. Pius, I don't think he had any children of his own, you know. Anyway, he had nephews and he had cousins and so forth. And suddenly they all became very wealthy because of the bank. They got on the board of directors and all this sort of thing. And one of his nephews I thought was kind of cute. He got a very high position in a pharmaceutical firm that manufactured birth control products. Oh, it's all who you know, folks. Anyway, it became corrupt in a very darker sense, of course. This is the money that went into the bank. It was mostly gold that the Vatican was getting from the Near East, the Balkans during the Second War. And the money was being laundered and converted. And this is how the Bishop Huddle was able to get Nazis like, Klaus Barbet, the butcher of Lyon, Joseph Mengele, the doctor with these insane experiments, and of course Adolf Eichmann, Hitler's executioner of the Jews. Money came out of the Vatican Bank to get these guys over to South America, so already the bank had a rather bad odor about it. And there were scandals about the bank. I'm going to go through one of the really big ones. But first of all, let me tell you that just in the paper a few months ago, there was all of a sudden there was an item that appeared which was to the effect that they were laundering Mafia money once again. And they had found at least $250,000, some crazy schemes. There's a fish farm in Sicily was sending money to a father so-and-so in the Vatican, and father so-and-so was putting it into the Vatican Bank, which is sending it to the mob, and it was kind of a crazy thing. Of course, they right away, the Vaticans, we knew nothing about this sort of thing, but there was a transaction attracted a lot of attention, was a $30 million of money that went through the bank. Its destination was completely unknown. Apparently it was drawn on a J.P. Morgan company. But who got the money, we don't know. This all right, this immediately smells of Mafia. But the latest one, and this is just in the last couple of days, is the case of the hospital in Milan. It's a teaching hospital. It's very closely related to the Catholic Church. It's well known for its research, and the quality of its medicine apparently is absolutely top rate. Why the church was interested in this thing is sort of a mystery, because you'd assume what they do is if the Catholic Church, build a hospital in Equatorial Africa. Why would you want to build one in Milan? You know, this kind of thing. Why? But they built it, and now they have it, and all of a sudden this thing is a money machine that's just spewing money out all over the place, and none of it being accounted for. It's in bankruptcy. Apparently, 1,500,000,000 euros have vanished. Private jets, vacations, crazy things, money, no accounting for it whatsoever. The guy who was the head of the thing, he was the administrator, was a guy named Mario Cal. He committed suicide in his office. The secretary heard the shot. She goes in there and reports the suicide. When the police come, here he's lying on the floor, and the gun he's not holding the gun is in a plastic bag. This is the kind of stuff you get with the Vatican. It's just utterly, it's so mixed with the Mafia, it's hard to take it apart. Well, now this is a great scandal in Italy, and of course our American press doesn't want to go into it too much. You don't want to embarrass the church with it. You know, don't do. So anyway, this is the kind of thing that goes on. Now, I want to tell you about a very famous scandal. This was huge. This involved the Mafia. Here's the story. Let me introduce you to some characters here, if I may. If I can find my pointer, which I have just done. Let's take, first of all, this picture right here. This is Pope Paul VI. Pope Paul VI, formerly Giovanni Battista Montini. He was a cardinal. He was a cardinal in Venice. And whilst in Venice, he met this gentleman, Miguel Sindona. The Pope was very anxious to build an orphanage. I mean, I should say the cardinal. He was then cardinal. He was not then Pope. He tried to get the funds for it. He wasn't any good at anything, basically, Montini. He just was not really a very competent person. At any rate, he enlisted the aid of this man who had been introduced to him, who claimed to have been a Milanese, born and raised in Milan, which was not true. He was from Sicily. Turned out that this man was a lieutenant in the mob of Carlo Gambino of New York. Suddenly, through the aid of this man, the money for the orphanage just appeared as if by magic. Montini was heavily impressed by this virtuous act, and so he became very close to Sindona. They were as thick as thieves, let me put it that way. I'm not really sure that Montini really knew what this guy was all about. Well, in the year of 1963, I believe it was, 1963, I'm pretty sure, the Pope died. Yes, this was John the 23rd. He died, and our friend here, Montini, the Patriarch of Milan, he now becomes Paul VI. And he is now the head of the so-called Vatican Bank. So-called because really it was named something else. If you go there, you're not going to find any reference to it in Vatican circles. It was known as the Institute for Religious Works. Sounds beautiful. Anyway, now Sindona is really in an excellent position to profit from his association with the Pope. And he begins to make a close association with the head of the bank at that particular time, whose name was Paul Marcinkus. Paul Marcinkus was he was just a great ape of a man. He was 6'4", 250 pounds, looked like a linebacker for the 49ers, just a huge man. And those are his qualifications for being a bank. You see, he had been Montini's bodyguard, and now as Pope, he's the Pope's bodyguard. And there was an attempt made on the Pope, Paul, in the Philippines, and this Paul Marcinkus was able to save the Pope from getting killed. And for that, he now becomes the head of the bank, and those are his qualifications. He is now dealing with Sindona. Now, where I could make a case, maybe Paul was so stupid that he didn't really know about this crook. Certainly Marcinkus did. He had to have known the whole thing, because they now started on a campaign of fraudulent activities. It's simply amazing. You can't believe it, really. In telling it, I find myself staggered by it. Give you one example. Sindona, through the Gambino mob, they counterfeited $950 million of corporate bonds, General Electric, Coca-Cola, this kind of stuff. And they deposit these bonds in the Vatican Bank. And so now the Vatican Bank can go out and get loans using this stuff for collateral. And they almost got away with it, except one of the bank institutions from which they were trying to get some loans took a look at the bonds, and even though they were awfully good, they consulted the American Banknote Company, which is the company that manufactures genuine bonds, and American banknote company said, very good-looking stuff, but counterfeit nevertheless. Imagine, they were about to float $950 million. They were going to use that for collateral on loans. And this is the Vatican Bank. Well, to be brief, Sindona ran into trouble in the United States. He pretty much owned a bank here. It was called the Franklin Bank in New York City, and he was bleeding it white. Which reminds me, incidentally, if you steal 25 bucks, you're a thief. If you steal $250,000, you're an embezzler. If you steal $25 million, you're a financier. Think about that in today's market, folks. Well, that's what this one was doing, and he went to a federal penitentiary here and served, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, and was then extradited to Italy, where he faced a charge of soliciting murder. He went to jail, and in jail he always enjoyed the same thing every morning for breakfast, which was what do you call it, espresso. Only it just had to be black as coal, and it had to be very sweet, and so it was dosed with sugar, except one day it was dosed with cyanide. Sindona never told the whole story. They got to him, as they did many other people, incidentally. Sindona's out of the way, but he has introduced to Paul Marcinkus, head of the bank, a bishop, incidentally. He's introduced a new chap, Roberto Calvi. Now, Calvi is somewhat a more, I don't know, you might say more probable creature, really, because he's a banker. But he is mob-connected, and also, curiously enough, he's a member of the Masonic order, which ordinarily would mean that you would be excommunicated for the Catholic Church. But it apparently had very little effect on Calvi. Calvi and Marcinkus started up these operations, and one of the things they did was to try to acquire a bank. It was called the Banco Ambrosiano. And they began to buy more of the stock and more of the stock and more of the stock with a view of getting the whole thing. And in the meantime, of course, the bank was involved in every illegality you can possibly imagine. When the whole thing blew up in their face, because the stock began to tumble in price, and the banks were calling in the loans on securities and so forth, and the thing went belly up, and Calvi was arrested. He was arrested for bank fraud, convicted. Despite that, the Vatican Bank was still writing letters of credits, letters of comfort, saying how wonderful this man was. You can trust him in everything. He's our #1 man, despite all of this stuff. Well, at this point, so much money was lost, and Calvi fled the country. He went to London, and about 10 days later, he was found hanging from the Blackfriars Bridge. The British government immediately said, oh, he committed suicide, which of course is nonsense, and the case was reopened. It's, once again, a concession to the church, always not to embarrass them. It turns out that of course he was murdered, and most likely by the mob. So let's stop this talk now, and let's go to another. And that'll be for next time. Let's call that bank. You get old, you do these things. Vatican Bank #2. This being #1, we'll call it Vatican Bank 2.